2 hours before the funeral, my stepsister burned my eulogy, leaving 4 words: "You're not family." What silenced the church wasn't my empty hands, it was what I said instead. I found the note at 11:42 in the morning, in the little robing room off the sacristy at St. Aldrich's, where I'd left my folder on the vestment cabinet 20 minutes earlier so I could go find a bottle of water for my hands, which had not stopped shaking since I woke up. The folder was gone. In its place, in the metal wastebasket under the window, was a curl of gray ash still giving off a thread of smoke, and resting on top of it, weighted down by a votive candle so the draft from the vent wouldn't scatter it, was a torn strip of the folder's own cover. 4 words, written in Dahlia's handwriting, the looping D she'd had since middle school: "You're not family." I stood there for maybe 10 seconds doing nothing but breathing in the smell of burned paper, which is not like any other smell, sharper and sadder than wood smoke. And then I picked up a strip of cardstock and folded it once and put it in the inside pocket of my blazer, next to the pocket square my father had picked out for me 2 months earlier, back when he could still stand at a mirror and tie his own tie. Then I walked out into the hallway and found the funeral director, a soft-spoken man named Oscar Prentice, refilling the guest book pens, and I asked him, as calmly as I have ever asked anything in my life, how many minutes I had until the service started. 78, he said, checking his watch. "You look pale, Miss Castellan. Do you need to sit down?" I told him I was fine. I was not fine. I had spent 11 days writing that eulogy. 4 pages, double-spaced, the only 4 pages in the world that said out loud what my father, Gordon Castellan, had actually been like. Not the sanitized version people say at funerals, but the real one. The man who painted the first Castellan auto body sign himself in 1994 with a paintbrush from the hardware store because he couldn't afford a sign company, who kept a coffee can of loose bolts on his desk his whole life because his own father had kept one, who used to drive me to swim practice at 5:40 in the morning, singing off-key to the radio because he thought it would embarrass me into waking up faster. 29 years of a man reduced to 4 pages, and Dahlia had turned them into ash in under 10 minutes while I was 3 hallways away pouring water into a paper cup. I want to be honest about something before I go further, because the story only makes sense if you understand what those 4 words actually meant and where they came from, and why I didn't scream or cry or do any of the things a normal person might do standing over a trash can full of her father's eulogy 2 hours before his funeral. I didn't scream because I had spent the last 3 weeks learning things about my stepmother that made a burned eulogy look, honestly, like the least of what she was capable of. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. My mother, Elaine, died when I was 12. Aneurysm, no warning, gone between one Tuesday and the next. My father remarried when I was 14 to a woman named Celeste Renfrow, who had a daughter my exact age named Dahlia. I want to say, because it matters later, that I tried. I really did. I let Celeste redecorate my mother's kitchen. I called her Celeste, and never once in 15 years called her Mom, but I was polite about it, and for a while, for maybe the first 18 months, I thought it might actually work, that we might become something like a family instead of 2 households wearing the same last name. Then, on my 16th birthday, my father bought me a car. A used Honda, nothing fancy, but mine, paid for out of the shop's account with his own signature on the check. Dahlia, 3 weeks later, got a brand new Jeep, also paid for out of the shop's account, and when I asked my father about it, carefully, not trying to start anything, he told me Celeste had explained that Dahlia—
Sorry to interrupt. Real quick, before the story continues. If this story hit close to home, here's the thing. Most people don't figure this stuff out until years later, after it's already cost them something. I put together the manipulation playbook so you don't have to learn it the hard way. 49 patterns, real examples, and exactly what to do the moment you spot one. It's already helped hundreds of people see clearly what took me years to figure out. Links in the description. Okay, back to what happened.
Needed something more reliable for the highway. And I remember standing in the driveway looking at that Jeep and understanding, for the first time, something I would spend the next 13 years relearning in increasingly expensive ways. That in that house, need was a story. Celeste got to write, and I was never going to be the one holding the pen. It went like that for years. Small things, mostly. The kind of thing you can't take to anyone because on their own they sound petty. Christmas stockings that mysteriously stopped having my name stitched on them the year I turned 19. A family portrait on the mantle that got updated in 2019 to a photo from Dahlia's college graduation, with no equivalent photo from mine ever making it into a frame, though I'd graduated the year before. My father's 70th birthday party, which Celeste planned down to the napkin rings, at which I discovered, 3 days beforehand, that I hadn't actually been invited. That the family dinner I'd heard about secondhand from an aunt was happening at a restaurant I wasn't on the reservation for, table of 11. And I made it 12 only because my father noticed the mistake, called me himself, sounding embarrassed in a way that broke my heart a little, and said, "Of course you're coming. Mari, there's been some mix-up with the list." I never once heard Celeste apologize for a mix-up. There were a lot of mix-ups. The 70th birthday dinner is the one I still think about most, because it was the first time my father actually saw it happen in real time instead of hearing about it secondhand from me, which had always been the problem. Celeste was careful, and I was the only witness who ever seemed to notice the pattern, which made it easy for everyone else to write it off as me being sensitive. That night, once the mistake was fixed and I was folded into the 12th chair, Celeste stood up with her wine glass for a toast and thanked everyone who has been part of Gordon's life for the last decade, and went around the table naming people. Her sister Dahlia, 2 of Dahlia's friends from college who'd somehow made the cut, and did not say my name. My father, 3 seats down, went very quiet, and later in the parking lot, I heard him say to her in a low voice he probably thought I couldn't hear over the valet stand, "You forgot Mari in the toast." Celeste laughed, a light, easy laugh, and said, "Oh, Gordon, I'm sure she knows she's included. I wasn't going to list every single person." And he didn't push it further, and neither did I, because by then, I'd learned that pushing it only ever made me the problem. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from being the only person keeping score in a house where everyone else has agreed to stop counting. And by the time my father got sick, I had 13 years of that exhaustion sitting quietly in my chest, which is part of why, looking back, I understand exactly why I didn't trust my own instincts the first few times something felt wrong that spring. I had spent so long being told, gently, lovingly, by a man who loved me and simply didn't want to referee his marriage, that I was reading too much into things, that when the real thing finally arrived, dressed up as paperwork instead of a seating chart, some part of me almost talked myself out of looking closer. My father built Castellan Auto Body from one bay in a strip mall to 4 full-service shops across the county. The original on Route 9, plus locations in Danforth, Kellerman, and out by the interstate exit in Oswell, over 31 years. He put me to work sweeping floors when I was 13, and by the time I was 26, I was doing the books for all 4 locations, unofficially, because he trusted numbers from me more than he trusted them from the bookkeeping software. Dahlia never worked a single shift at any of the shops. That's not me being petty. It's just a fact, and it matters, because it's part of why what happened next was so easy for Celeste to plan and so hard for anyone else to see coming. In February, 7 months before the funeral, my father was diagnosed with stage IV pancreatic cancer. The oncologist at Fairmount Regional gave him 4 months, maybe 5 if the first round of chemo took. He lived 7, which the same oncologist told me privately was more fight than I usually see, and which I have come to understand was mostly stubbornness, because my father was not a man who accepted a doctor's math without an argument. I moved into the guest room of his house in April, and the fatigue got bad enough that he needed someone there overnight. Celeste did not object to this. I want to be fair. She seemed, if anything, relieved to have the overnight coverage handled by someone else, since she and Dahlia both kept what I can only describe as remarkably busy schedules for 2 women whose husband and stepfather was dying 40 feet down the hall. It was during those months that I started noticing things I didn't have a name for yet. The first thing was small. Late April, a Tuesday, I came downstairs around 10 at night to get my father a glass of water and found Celeste at the kitchen table with a stack of papers and a man I didn't recognize. Mid-50s, cheap suit, a battered leather folio open in front of him. She introduced him quickly, too quickly, as just someone helping with paperwork for the house. And by the time I'd filled the water glass and come back through, he was gone and the papers were gone with him. I didn't think much of it. People update things when someone's dying. Insurance, wills, all of it. It's normal. I told myself that for a long time. The second thing was on May 9th. I know the date because it was the day before my father's second round of chemo, and I'd written it on the whiteboard in the kitchen where we tracked his appointments. I came home from the pharmacy to find my father, gray-faced, sitting at the same kitchen table with a pen in his shaking hand, and Celeste standing behind him with her hand on his shoulder, and a document in front of him that I only caught a glimpse of before Celeste swept it into a folder, enough to see the words "Trust Amendment" across the top in bold, and a signature line at the bottom that my father had not yet signed. "What's this?" I asked. "Just some estate cleanup," Celeste said, smiling the specific smile she used when she wanted a conversation to be over. "Boring stuff, Mari. Your father's tired. Can you grab his afternoon pills?" My father looked up at me, and for a second, just a second, something crossed his face that I didn't understand yet, something between confusion and apology. And then Celeste said gently, "Gordon, you were in the middle of signing," and he picked the pen back up. I did not see that document signed. I want to be precise about that, because precision is the only thing that ended up mattering. I left the room to get his pills. When I came back, the folder was closed and Celeste was gone, and my father was staring at the tabletop with an expression I now recognize in hindsight as a man trying to remember something he already knew he wasn't going to be able to hold on to. The third thing, and the one that finally made me start paying real attention, happened on May 14th, 5 days later. My father was admitted, unplanned, to Ashford Regional Medical Center, a hospital 140 miles from the house in the city where his specialist was based, for an emergency procedure to place a biliary stent after his bilirubin levels spiked dangerously overnight. I remember the drive because I made it in 2 hours and 11 minutes going 85 the whole way, terrified I wouldn't get there in time. And I remember that he was under conscious sedation for most of the day, in and out, slurring, asking me twice within 20 minutes whether my mother, his first wife, dead 17 years by then, had called yet. I remember all of this specifically because 11 weeks later, going through a banker's box of old paperwork I had no business going through except that grief makes you do strange, methodical things at 2 in the morning, I found a copy of that trust amendment, the one from the kitchen table on May 9th, and it was dated May 14th, notarized May 14th, witnessed May 14th at 2:40 in the afternoon at an address 40 minutes from my father's house. The same day he was 140 miles away, sedated, in a hospital bed, asking about his dead wife. That was the moment the floor of my life quietly, permanently changed shape, and I didn't say a word to anyone. Not yet. My father died on August 3rd at 4:52 in the morning, in the same house I'd been sleeping in for 4 months, with me holding one hand and a hospice nurse named Patrice checking his pulse every 20 minutes through the last night. Celeste and Dahlia were both asleep down the hall. I did not wake them until it was was over. The funeral was originally scheduled for August 9th. It did not happen until August 30th because Celeste and I got into a legal fight, a real one, lawyers and everything, over cremation versus burial. My father's will, the one drafted in 2017, before any of this started, was explicit. He wanted to be buried next to my mother at Fairhaven Memorial, in the plot he'd bought the same year she died. Celeste wanted cremation, quickly, quietly, and when I pushed back, citing the will, she pushed back harder, hard enough that I had to hire an estate attorney of my own, a sharp, unflappable woman named Naomi Okafor, just to get a court to confirm what the will already said in plain English. It took 3 weeks. Those 3 weeks were, without question, the worst of my life up to that point, and also, I would come to understand, the only reason I was able to walk into that church on August 30th with what I walked in with. Because during those 3 weeks, while Celeste was fighting me over where my father's body would rest, I started digging. I started with the banker's box, because that's where the copy of the May 14th Trust Amendment had turned up, and once I actually sat down and read the whole document, instead of skimming it in a panic, 3 things jumped out at me. The first was the notary stamp at the bottom. Harlan T. Doyle, Notary Public, commission expires 06/30, previous year. I looked it up on the Secretary of State's public registry 2 days later at 1 a.m., sitting on my father's guest bed with my laptop balanced on my knees. Harlan Doyle's commission had expired 11 months before he supposedly notarized my father's signature. His commission had not been renewed. It didn't exist anymore. Legally, on May 14th, Harlan Doyle was not a notary at all. The second thing was the witness line. Trust amendments in our state require a witness, in addition to the notary. The name printed there was Yvonne Castillo. I didn't know who that was. Celeste didn't have any friends named Yvonne that I'd ever met in 15 years. The third thing, the one that actually made my hands go cold, was the ownership language on page 4. The amendment restructured 61% of the equity in Castellan Auto Body Group, all 4 shops, 31 years of my father's work, into a newly formed holding company called CDC Holdings LLC. Not a trust for Celeste's benefit, not a percentage adjustment. A direct transfer, 61%, into an entity I'd never heard of, effective the day my father was supposedly awake and lucid enough to sign it. I called Naomi Okafor the next morning. Her office was above a dry cleaner on Fenmore Street, small, cluttered with banker's boxes of her own, and she listened to me lay out what I had: the expired notary, the unfamiliar witness name, the 61%, without interrupting once, taking notes on a legal pad in handwriting almost as illegible as my father's had become. When I finished, she set her pen down and said, "I want to be straight with you before we go any further. Contesting a trust amendment against a grieving family during a funeral dispute is going to look to some people like a daughter who's angry about money. I need you to understand that going in, because it's going to get said about you, publicly, probably by her." I told her I understood. "Good," she said. "Then let's make sure that when it does get said, we've already made it impossible to believe." She pulled a fresh legal pad from her desk drawer and wrote 3 words across the top: timeline, money, witnesses. "Everything we find," she said, "goes under one of those 3. If it doesn't fit under one of those, it's not evidence, it's just a feeling. And feelings don't hold up in probate court no matter how right they are." 2 nights later, unable to sleep, I sat on the floor of the guest room with a banker's box between my knees and went through every piece of paper in it by the light of my phone, because I didn't want to wake anyone by turning on the overhead lamp. The box smelled like the inside of my father's old filing cabinet, dust and rubber bands gone brittle, and somewhere around 1 a.m., I found, tucked behind a stack of old tax returns, a manila envelope with Marcus Trent's law firm's return address, unopened, forwarded to the house sometime in June, and apparently never brought upstairs. Inside was a duplicate copy of the same trust amendment, along with a cover letter dated May 15th, the day after the notarization, addressed to Celeste, not to my father, that read, in part, "Please find enclosed the fully executed amendment as discussed. Original notarized copy retained in our files per your instruction." I sat there with that letter in my lap for a long time, the house silent around me except for the hum of the refrigerator 2 floors down, and I understood that I was no longer looking for evidence of a mistake. I was looking at evidence of a plan. Over the following 2.5 weeks, working around the funeral fight, around the estate meetings, around going into the shops every day to make sure payroll still went out and the mechanic still had someone to answer to, I built a file. I want to walk through it the way I found it, because the order matters, because every piece I found made the last one worse. CDC Holdings LLC had been registered with the Secretary of State on April 26, 13 days before the kitchen table scene, 18 days before the notarization date. Registered agent, Celeste Castellan. Address, our family's house. I pulled the filing myself for $11. 4 days after that, on April 30th, a business checking account was opened in CDC Holdings' name at First Meridian Bank. Naomi subpoenaed the records once probate opened, which took another 5 weeks, but the account had a single deposit that month, $2,000, seed money, and then nothing else moved through it until August 5th, 2 days after my father died, when $340,000 landed in it in a single wire transfer from Castellan Auto Body Group's operating account. 2 days after his death, the trust amendment had authorized it on paper, the moment the underlying trust became irrevocable, which it does automatically at the death of the grantor. Naomi brought in a forensic accountant named T.O. Brannigan to trace the money once probate opened, because she said she didn't want the 2 of us building a financial timeline out of guesswork, when a professional could build one out of bank routing numbers instead. I met him once in Naomi's office, a quiet man in his 40s with a laptop covered in stickers hackers from software conferences, who spread 3 printed statements across the conference table like a man laying out a hand of cards and said, without any particular drama in his voice, "I want to walk you through what I found, because I think it matters that you hear it in order, not just as a number at the end." He tapped the first statement. April 26th, CDC Holdings LLC is registered. April 30th, the account opens with a $2,000 deposit. That's seed money, nothing unusual on its own. Plenty of legitimate LLCs start that way. He tapped the second. May 14th, the amendment is notarized. Nothing moves yet because the trust doesn't authorize a transfer until it becomes irrevocable, which under this document's language happens automatically at your father's death. He tapped the third and his voice didn't change, but something in the room did. August 5th, 2 days after Gordon Castellan's death, $340,000 leaves the operating account of Castellan Auto Body Group in a single wire into CDC Holdings, same day the bank opened. That's not a coincidence of timing, Ms. Castellan. Someone had the wire instructions ready to go before your father had even been buried. Then, there was the hospital records piece, which Naomi got through a formal request with my consent as next of kin. Ashford Regional's admission log for May 14th showed my father checked in at 8:14 a.m., in a procedure by 11:20, in recovery under conscious sedation until nearly 4 p.m. The notarization on the trust amendment listed a time of 2:40 p.m., the middle of his recovery window, 140 miles from the house where the document said the signing took place. Then there was the tremor. This one I found myself, not Naomi, and it's the detail that still makes my stomach drop a little every time I think about it. My father developed a hand tremor from oxaliplatin neuropathy starting in his 3rd round of chemo in early May, the same round that put him in Ashford. Every single document he signed after that point, insurance forms, a car title transfer, even his own birthday card to me in June, shows it. A visible waver in the pen strokes, worse on longer words. I laid 6 of those signatures next to the one on the trust amendment on the guest bed at 2 in the morning, and the trust amendment signature was smooth, steady, not a single waver. I'm not a handwriting expert, and I said so to Naomi, who hired one anyway, a document examiner named Priyanka Suresh, who filed a report 3 weeks later stating, in language far more careful than mine, that the signature exhibits characteristics inconsistent with the known exemplar set from the same time period, and is more consistent in pen pressure and stroke continuity with a traced or practiced reproduction. Then there was the voicemail. My father kept an old flip phone in his nightstand drawer for years after he switched to a smartphone. He liked it for the alarm clock, he said, hated the smartphone's alarm, and I found it while clearing out the drawer on the night of August 21st, 9 days before the funeral, looking for nothing in particular, just doing the slow, awful work of touching everything a dead person owned. It had 4 saved voicemails. 3 were nothing, a pharmacy reminder, my own voice from March asking if he wanted soup. The 4th was dated May 12th, 2 days before the hospitalization, and it was not addressed to him at all. It was a voicemail Celeste had apparently meant to leave for someone else and misdialed, landing instead on a phone she probably forgot he even had. I have listened to it more times than I can count. 22 seconds. Celeste's voice, tight and fast, talking to a man I now know was Marcus Trent, the family's longtime estate attorney. Marcus, I need this done before he goes in for that procedure Thursday. Not after. If we wait for after, he's not going to be sharp enough and someone's going to ask questions. Just get Harlan to do the date right. Backdate it if you have to. Gordon's not going to remember signing anything by the time the sedation wears off anyway. Naomi told me very calmly over the phone that this was the kind of piece of evidence litigators wait a whole career to find. I sat on the floor of my childhood bedroom and cried for 40 minutes, not from sadness anymore, but from something closer to vindication, which I hadn't expected to feel that ugly and that necessary at the same time. I called Naomi back at 11 p.m. that same night, unable to wait until morning, and read her the transcript I'd typed out word for word, my voice shaking on, backdate it if you have to. She was quiet for a moment on the other end, and then she said something I've held on to since. Marisol, I want you to understand, this isn't a paperwork mistake anymore. This is premeditation. Whatever happens from here, you did not imagine any of this. I hung up the phone and sat on the floor with my back against the bed frame, the old flip phone still warm in my palm from being held so long, and I thought about my father dictating half-finished thoughts into a phone he liked for its alarm clock, never once imagining that the last thing it would preserve of that house wasn't his own voice at all, but hers. 2 days after that, I called Uncle Desmond for the first time in nearly a year, not yet ready to tell him everything, just testing the water. How are you holding up? I asked him, and he laughed, short and humorless. Depends which version of the family you're asking me to hold up for, he said. I haven't been to a real family dinner in 8 months, Mari. I got uninvited to Christmas by a text message. I figured it was just me getting old and difficult. I told him it wasn't him. I told him I was starting to understand it hadn't been me either, all those years. He went quiet on the line for a long moment, and then he said, you tell me if you need me to sign something, testify to something, sit in a room and stare somebody down. I loved my brother. I'm not going anywhere. The last thing, the one that closed the loop, was Yvonne Castillo, the name on the witness line. It took me 4 days to find her, working from a client list at the salon where Celeste got her hair done every other Tuesday. Yvonne was a stylist there, 26 years old, and when I finally reached her by phone on August 27th, 3 days before the funeral, and asked her gently whether she remembered witnessing a document for Celeste Castellan back in May, there was a long pause, and then she said in a small voice, she had me sign something at the salon on my lunch break. She said it was insurance paperwork for her her husband, and she needed a second signature since she was already going to be a witness on it. I never saw anyone else sign anything. I never met her husband. I didn't even know he was sick. I asked her if she would be willing to say that in front of other people, if it came to it. There was another long pause. Then, yeah, she said. Yeah, okay. That's not what I thought I was signing. I drove out to meet her in person 2 days after that call, at a coffee shop near the salon, because I wanted her to see my face when I explained what I was actually asking of her. She was younger than I'd pictured, nervous, twisting a paper napkin the way I imagined I probably looked twisting things myself lately. I need to be honest with you, I told her. There's a chance this goes to a courtroom eventually, and there's a chance it just happens in a much smaller room with lawyers. And there's a chance if things go a certain way, it happens in front of people who loved my father and have no idea any of this is real. I can't promise you which one. I can only promise you that what you saw actually happened, and it matters. She was quiet for a long moment, turning her coffee cup slowly on the table. My mom always told me, she finally said, if somebody asks you to sign something you don't understand, you don't sign it. I broke that rule once, at work, on my lunch break, because a woman I liked doing hair for asked me to as a favor. I felt sick about it since May, if I'm honest. I didn't know why until you called. She looked up at me. Whatever room it happens in, I'll be there. I want to pause the documentation and tell you about one night in the middle of all this, because it's the night I almost said everything out loud too early, and I think about how differently it all could have gone if I had. It was August 19th, 11 days before the funeral, and I was at the house packing up some of my father's clothes for donation, a task Celeste had specifically asked me to handle since you're the sentimental one, when she came into the bedroom with a glass of wine and sat on the edge of the bed and said, out of nowhere, you know he loved you very much, Mari, whatever you might be feeling right now. I remember standing there with one of his flannel shirts in my hands, the CDC Holdings account statement burning a hole in the folder on my phone, $340,000, a witness who'd never witnessed anything, a voicemail with the word backdate in it, and I almost said it. I almost turned around and asked her, right there, holding his shirt, why she needed a hairdresser to sign for a document she claimed my father had personally, lucidly, competently authorized. My mouth actually opened. Then Dahlia appeared in the doorway and said, Mom, the caterer's on the phone about the reception. They need the final head count. And the moment passed, and Celeste got up, smoothing her skirt, and said, we'll talk soon, sweetheart, to me, which she had never once called me in 15 years, and I understood, watching her leave, that I had almost handed her 11 days to clean up whatever she could still clean up. I didn't make that mistake again. I kept every card in my hand until I knew exactly where and when I was going to lay them down. The morning of the funeral, before any of it, before the church, before the wastebasket, before the 4 words, I had a phone call with my father's older brother, my uncle Desmond, who I hadn't spoken to properly in almost a year, because Celeste had, without my noticing until much later, quietly steered nearly every family gathering into shapes that left him out of them too. Desmond had been named as a co-trustee on the original 2017 trust, alongside Celeste, a fact I only discovered from the estate documents Naomi pulled. She asked me to sign something back in the spring, he told me, his voice rough over the phone. Some amendment. I read 3 lines of it and told her I wasn't signing anything without Gordon's own attorney looking at it first. Not with him sick like that. She got real cold with me after that, stopped inviting me to things. I figured I'd done something wrong. He was quiet for a second. Mari, is that what this is? Is that what she's been doing? I told him what I'd found. All of it. He didn't say anything for almost 30 seconds, and when he finally spoke, his voice had changed completely. I'll be at the church at noon, he said. Front pew, you tell me what you need me to do. Which brings me back to the wastebasket, and the ash, and the 4 words at 11:42 in the morning, 78 minutes before the service. I stood in that little robing room for a while after Oscar Prentice walked away, and I thought about a lot of things. About my mother's grave, finally getting its second half filled after 17 years. About my father singing off-key at 5:40 in the morning. About a hairdresser named Yvonne who had agreed to come, quietly, and sit in the back pew where Celeste wouldn't recognize her. I thought about the fact that everything I needed to say was not actually gone at all. The eulogy had been 4 pages about who my father was, but the folder that had been sitting next to it in my bag, the one Dahlia hadn't found because it was still in my car, because Naomi and I had printed a second complete set the night before as a backup for a probate hearing that was, coincidentally, scheduled for the following Tuesday. Had everything else. You're not family. I read it one more time, standing there, and then I put it back in my pocket, and I walked out to the parking lot to get the real folder out of my car, and I went to find my seat. The church was full, 150 people, easily. Mechanics from all 4 shops sitting shoulder to shoulder with men in suits from the Rotary Club my father had belonged to for 20 years. Celeste sat in the front pew in black, composed, her hand resting on Dahlia's arm. Uncle Desmond sat 2 rows back on the opposite side, exactly where he said he'd be. I saw Yvonne slip into the last pew in a plain gray dress right as the organ started. The pastor, a kind, weathered man named Father Ansel, who had known my father for a decade, spoke for 11 minutes, gentle, general, the kind of eulogy a pastor gives when he genuinely liked someone but didn't know him the way family does. Then he looked at me and said, Gordon's daughter, Marisol, would like to say a few words. I stood up. I did not have my 4 pages. I had a different folder, and I set it on the lectern, and I did not open it right away. I wrote a eulogy for my father, I said. 4 pages. I worked on it for 11 days. 2 hours ago, I found it burned in a wastebasket in the sacristy, with a note on top of the ashes that said, and I'm quoting it exactly. "You're not family." And the church went very still. I could see Celeste's hand tighten on Dahlia's arm. "I'm not going to pretend that didn't happen," I said, "because pretending is what's kept this family broken for 15 years, and I'm done doing my part in that. So instead of the eulogy, I'm going to tell you what I've actually been doing for the last 3 weeks. While some of you thought I was just fighting my stepmother over a burial plot." Denial. Celeste stood up before I'd gotten through my second sentence, her voice pitched low but urgent, moving toward the aisle. "Marisol, this is not the place. Sit down, Celeste," I said, and I said it quietly, but something in my voice made her actually do it. Or maybe it was Father Ansel's hand, gently, on her shoulder, guiding her back into the pew. "This is exactly the place. This is his funeral. You're the one who decided today would be about you." I laid it out plainly, in order, the way I'd rehearsed it in the car at 4 in the morning. The trust amendment dated May 14th. The notary whose commission had expired 11 months before he supposedly stamped it. The witness line signed by a hairdresser who'd never met my father. I held up a printed copy of the hospital admission log. 8:14 a.m. Ashford Regional, 140 miles away. Next to a printed copy of the amendment's notarization block, time-stamped 2:40 p.m. The very same day. "He wasn't home," I said. "He was in a hospital bed being sedated for an emergency procedure. And somehow, according to this document, he was also sitting across from a notary whose license didn't legally exist, signing away 61% of the business he spent 31 years building." A murmur went through the pews. Someone near the back, one of the shop managers I found out later, a man named Kurt Abelson who had worked the Oswell location for 19 years, actually stood halfway up before sitting back down, his hand pressed flat against his mouth. I saw 2 of the Rotary Club men lean toward each other, whispering, and an older woman in the third pew, my father's longtime bookkeeper before I took the job over, put her hand to her chest like she'd been struck. Nobody in that church had come expecting numbers. They had come expecting hymns. "That's a doctored document," Celeste said, standing again, her voice sharper now, carrying, "minimize. I don't know where you got that, but it's clearly been altered. This is disgusting, Marisol. To do this today, at your own father's funeral." "It's not doctored," I said. "It's from the county recorder's office. I filed it 3 days ago when it became part of the probate record. You can walk up here right now and read the seal yourself." I let that sit for a second. "But even if we set that aside, even if every piece of paper in this folder is somehow wrong, I'd still want to know why $340,000 moved out of the shop's operating account into a company you created 2 days after he died." Her face changed then, the anger sliding into something more careful, more managed. "Your father wanted me taken care of," she said, quieter now, aimed less at me and more at the pews, at the room, performing the wounded widow again. "Minimize. Second stage. He told me himself more than once that he didn't want me struggling after he was gone. Is that so hard to understand? Is it so wrong that a dying man wanted to provide for his wife?" "He did want to provide for you," I said. "The 2017 trust already did that. A house free and clear. $180,000 outright, half of his life insurance. That was never in dispute, Celeste, and you know it because you fought me over a burial plot instead of any of that. This isn't about him providing for you. This is about 61% of a company he built with his own hands, moved into an LLC with your name on the filing, using a signature a document examiner says doesn't match his hand from that period, backed by a witness who's admitted she never saw him sign anything." I looked at Yvonne in the back pew, and I nodded, and I watched her stand up, small, shaking a little, but standing, and say, in a clear voice that carried better than I expected, "I never met him. She told me it was insurance paperwork. I signed it on my lunch break at the salon." The church made a sound I can only describe as a collective intake of breath. Behind me, I heard Father Ansel exhale slowly, and somewhere to my left, Kurt Abelson said, not quietly enough, "Jesus, Celeste," and didn't seem to care that 150 people heard him say it in a church. Blame shift. Celeste turned on me fully then, all pretense of grief dropping away in front of 150 witnesses. "You have hated me since the day I married your father," she said, her voice breaking, but not, I think, from sorrow. "You've never once treated me like family. You never called me mom. You've resented Dahlia and me for 15 years because you couldn't stand sharing him, and now you're doing this, humiliating us, humiliating your own sister, in front of everyone he loved, because you can't stand the idea that he might have wanted to make sure I was safe." "I have a voicemail," I said. The church went silent in a different way this time. Total. I hadn't planned to say it that bluntly, but something in me had simply run out of patience for being talked over. "May 12th, I said, 2 days before the hospital. You called Marcus Trent. You said, and I'm quoting this from a recording I have on my phone right now, 'Get Harlan to do the date right. Backdate it if you have to. Gordon's not going to remember signing anything by the time the sedation wears off anyway.' I have never in my life watched a person's face do what Celeste's face did in that moment. It wasn't sudden. It was like watching a structure that had been standing on a cracked foundation for months, finally, quietly, give way, the anger draining out first, then the composure, then whatever was left underneath, which turned out to be something closer to fear. Break. "I didn't," she started, and stopped. Her hand went to her mouth. She looked for the first time since I'd known her, genuinely young, genuinely lost, the way I imagined she must have looked at some point before all of this, before whatever had made her decide, 13 days before my father went into surgery, that a hairdresser's signature and an expired notary stamp were a reasonable way to secure her family's future. "I never meant—" Gordon and I talked about the business. He understood. He wanted— She stopped again. Her eyes went to Dahlia, sitting frozen beside her, and something passed between them that I still can't fully name. Then Celeste sat down, hard, and put her face in her hands, hands and didn't say anything else. Dahlia did not move. She sat very still, staring at the floor, and I understood, watching her, that she had not known any of this either. Not the LLC, not the notary, not the voicemail. She had known only what her mother had told her, which apparently was enough to make her burn 4 pages about a man she'd grown up in the same house as, over a note she must have believed in some genuinely wounded way was true. I didn't say anything to her directly then. I still had a funeral to finish. I closed the folder. My father built 4 auto shops out of one bay in a strip mall, I said, my voice steadier than I expected it to be. He kept a coffee can of loose bolts on his desk his whole life because his own father did. He drove me to swim practice at 5:40 in the morning, singing off-key on purpose because he thought it would wake me up faster. I wrote 4 pages about that man, and I'm not going to get them back today. But I wanted you all to know why. Father Ansel stood gently and put his hand on my shoulder and walked me back to my seat and finished the service himself. 8 months later, I stood in the original Castellan auto body bay on Route 9, on the anniversary of the day my father opened it, running my hand along the wall where the hand-painted sign used to hang before we had it professionally restored and remounted behind glass, out of the weather, where it's going to last. The estate litigation settled 11 weeks after the funeral. Celeste pled guilty to conspiracy to commit fraud and elder financial exploitation, a charge that applies even when the elder is your own dying husband, which is a fact I did not know existed until Naomi explained it to me, sitting in her office, not unkindly. She was ordered to pay full restitution, the $340,000 plus interest plus legal fees, and received 5 years of probation, no jail time, largely because the judge weighed the guilty plea and her full cooperation once the voicemail surfaced. Harlan Doyle, the notary whose commission had expired 11 months before he stamped my father's signature, was referred separately for prosecution. It turned out ours wasn't the only fraudulent document with his stamp on it, and I understand from Naomi that the state's case against him is ongoing. The 61% of the company came back into the trust, and Uncle Desmond and I now co-trustee it together, exactly the way the 2017 document my father actually signed with a shaking, honest hand always said we would. All 4 shops are still open. 112 employees still have jobs, including 3 mechanics who'd worked for my father for over 20 years, and told me quietly, in the parking lot after the estate finally closed, that they'd been afraid the whole thing would get sold off out from under them. It didn't. It's not going to. Kurt Abelson still runs the Oswell shop, and he still calls me boss, in a way that makes me laugh every time. And Naomi Okafor now handles the trust's legal work permanently, which I'm grateful for, more than I think I've ever properly told her. Yvonne Castillo, the hairdresser, sent me a card that October, just a few lines, saying she was glad she'd come and that she hoped I understood she never would have signed anything if she'd known what it actually was. I wrote back and told her I never once doubted that, not for a second, and that whatever debt existed in that whole story, it wasn't hers to carry. I want to tell you the one thing I haven't been able to close, because it's the part that still sits with me at night more than any of the rest of it. Dahlia and I have not spoken since the funeral. I wrote her a letter 4 months ago. Not an accusation, just an offer, an open door, one line that said I didn't think she'd known and that I hoped someday we could talk. I never got a response. I don't know if she read it and couldn't answer, or didn't read it at all, or is simply not ready, and I've made a kind of peace with not knowing because some doors you can only leave open. You can't force anyone to walk through them. My father's sign hangs behind glass now, above the front counter, where every customer who walks in sees it first. I stood under it for a long time on the anniversary, in the quiet of the shop before opening, and I thought about how he used to say the whole business was really just a coffee can of loose bolts and a lot of stubbornness, held together by people who showed up. I think that's true of families too in the end, that the ones that hold are the ones that show up, even when it's hard, even when it costs something. My father showed up for 31 years. I'm still learning how to be the kind of person who does that too. Anyway, that's the story. If any of you have been through something like this, the slow kind of betrayal that hides behind paperwork and family dinners you didn't get invited to, I hope this helped a little. Full story's linked below and on my channel if you want to hear it read out loud. Take care of yourselves out there.